Hi everyone, this is Counseling 2250, Corey's Chapter 12, Death and Loss. So we started off in this semester with talking about birth, right? The beginning of life. And now we are talking about death. So we're going to examine the beliefs about death. Um, if we were in an actual classroom, we would be talking about our thoughts on mortality or the idea of death, how everyone feels about it, because we're probably going to get a bunch of different answers, right? Thoughts about the eventual death of people you love. And that's something that you guys who are younger might not necessarily experience, but I'm not excluding you. But as you get older, and let's say if you're close to your family members, your parents, most likely you'll see them starting to age. And we all see it and treat it and deal with it differently. Instead of focusing on death, think about how well you are living your life. So that's a very existential idea as well, right? With death, there is life. If you're aware, understand, and accept death, it can make a meaningful life. And that's true because we know that if we don't, last as long as forever, let's say, we're going to try to make, the time that we're here count. In what ways am I not as alive as I might be? So that's a really great question for us to inspect when it comes to our life. What will I do with my awareness of the ways in which I'm not fully alive? The importance of fully experiencing grief when we suffer significant losses. And we'll talk a lot about grieving and mourning in this chapter as well. So Albert Ellis, a psychologist, said, life has inevitable suffering as well as pleasure. By realistically thinking, feeling, and acting to enjoy what you can, and unangrily and unwhiningly accepting painful aspects that cannot be changed, you open yourself to much joy. And that's pretty much very, very logical when it comes to psychology, right? Once you know where you are, who you are at this moment, then you are able to basically reach a different point in your life where you can have a lot of joy and happiness. But if you're not aware and you don't realize what you have or who you are at that moment, you're not going to be able to go towards the joy that you so desire, right? Self-awareness is really important before we can change. Our fears of death, leaving behind those we love, losing our own selves or ourselves, encountering the unknown, coping with the humiliation of a painful or long dying process. And talk about something that's really real. As you get older, I guarantee you, you're going to start hearing your friends basically say, when I get older, I don't want to be in the senior home where someone's like wiping my butt and stuff like that. It's just weird. I'd rather just like die instantly, like have a heart attack or whatever, and then just die. And you'll hear about that. And there's, good things and bad things obviously about both ways. But you'll start to hear more and more people talking about, not having this life where you're just laying in a hospital bed or something like that, with your dirtiness and all that other stuff that people tend to think about and associate with that. Steve Jobs is the CEO of Apple and Pixar Animation Studios, or he was. He, in 2005, gave a Stanford graduation speech that is actually really well known. So this is part of it. He said, your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. Pretty powerful, right? So what he's basically saying is be yourself. Be your authentic self. Don't try to be someone else because that means that you're just pretending, and you're not going to really enjoy your own life or your own self. And then we have Maureen Schwartz, who was an elderly professor who was dying. And there's a book written called Tuesdays with Maurice that was made into a movie written by a man named Mitch, who knew Maury. And what he did was he met with a student every Tuesday to talk about living and dying. Here's a quote. The truth is, once you learn how to die, you learn how to live. Wasting life is even sadder than dying, and worried about losing his facilities or his abilities and being more dependent. So those are the things that they talk about. I put the trailer here, so please feel free to watch the trailer, and if it's interesting, I hope you also watch the movie. We do not have to avoid people who are dying. There may be a lot to learn. Although some people are comfortable talking about the process of dying, their loved ones may be uncomfortable talking about it. And just think about your own family, right? Within its own specific culture, maybe, or whatever it is, to talk about death. Like, would you guys be able to say something like, hey, if I die, this is what I wish will happen with me, or if I get really sick and I can no longer communicate, this is what I would like to do. For some families or from cultures, it feels like it's bad luck to talk about things like that, right? And then so we don't talk about it. But that also has its own problems. And we'll discuss this as we go along with this here. There's a movie called It's My Party, and I believe it was in the 90s. And it's a really great movie, and it is about a man who is dying, and so he decides to throw a party to kind of like say goodbye and make amends to the people that um, he might have had fights with, but he still cares about. So I really highly recommend you watch it. It was really good. I mean, I teared up when I was watching the trailer. And it's just a really great movie. Have you had any experiences of being with a dying person? Do you tend to avoid talking with people who are dying? And what seems to be your greatest fear? So I want you to start thinking about that. What is the process? And some of you guys are actually very comfortable talking to people who are sick. And so you might actually end up working in a hospice or in a hospital where you're very comfortable with death and pain and disease, let's say, right? And for some people, you guys are not comfortable, and that's okay. I actually, before I became a graduate student, in rehab, I actually did an internship at a senior home, and I actually really enjoyed it. However, it was also really sad when, I come back the next day and someone that I was talking to or hanging out with wasn't there, right? Like they're gone. And you know where they went, basically. Unfortunately, they probably went to the hospital and then they probably passed away. So that is something that some of you guys are very comfortable with, but some of you who are not. And I want you to just start thinking about it and understanding that we are all going to die. There's nothing that has made us all become immortal just yet, right? And this is why comic books and all those things are so obsessed with it, because it's such an interesting idea and concept. Now let's move on to the death and the meaning of life. Existentialists view the acceptance of death as vital to the discovery of meaning and the purpose in life. So again, we're talking about existentialism again. Think about the yin and yang sign, the dark and the light, right? So when we have one, we also have the other. If we understand the concept of the future, we understand the inevitability of death, which basically means that if you think forward, you also have to consider that there is a time when you are going to die. It gives meaning to our existence. Do you make every moment count, right? For me personally, I try to live without any regrets, or basically kind of like regret of like doing something. And I think part of that is because I know I don't want to waste my future time trying to fix those regrets, right? And so I'll try to live as much as I possibly can with decisions where I'm like, you know what, I'm not going to try and fix that because I think I made the right decision and, I might have failed, but I also learned something from it as well. And I hope that you also do something similar or try to figure out exactly what to do, because I also don't want the rest of your future to be about trying to fix things that you did in the past, right? We can address and resolve things that happened in the past, but it should not be filled with just doing that. It should be about enjoying life the way that you want to live. Whether or not we have the money to afford things that we want, obviously that's not me, but I do also enjoy my life though, even though I am poor. Irving Yalom found that in a group of people with cancer experienced inner changes. So think about a group of people who found out that they had a disease that could potentially kill them. So they started to rearrange their life priorities, right? What is really important? Let's talk about it and think about it now. A sense of liberation. So like, you know what? I don't have to worry about certain things in my life anymore because I'm going to die soon. So let me just really focus on the important stuff. An increased sense of living in the moment, obviously, because you're like, I'm going to die soon, so I might as well enjoy today, as much as I can. Appreciation of the basic facts of life. A deeper communication with loved ones. You're going to really talk to them and say, look, I love you, I care about you, and I want you to know these things, right? And then fewer interpersonal fears, willing to take more risks. Again, fewer interpersonal fears, meaning you're not as worried about the problems with other people that you have. You're going to try and really fix it or resolve it or make it or whatever it is. You don't have time to just kind of like, no, I don't know if I want to talk to that person, blah, blah, blah. No, you're like, you know what? I don't have anything else to lose. I'm going to die soon, so let me just do it now. And again, this is for a group of people who were diagnosed with cancer, who felt like they were going to die soon. Here's a quote. It is not easy to live every moment wholly aware of death. It's like trying to stare at the sun in the face. You can stand only so much of it. Because we cannot live frozen in fear, we generate methods to soften death's terror. Right? It's going to happen. It's inevitable, right? Which means it's going to happen. So how do we live life so that that fear of death or that moment of death is not going to be so scary, right? And that's by living life and enjoying life. Choices in the face of death. Cultures affect our perceptions on death, of course, right? And religion as well, where some religions or cultures believe in the afterlife while others don't. So it's really interesting to be able to meet other people who are raised to see these things. Some see it as a complete ending. Others believe it's a continuation after life. All right, so here is something that's kind of controversial. I think it's called the manene, is images and traditional corpse cleaning. So the explanation of it is in the first link, the one that I hyperlinked called explanation. There's one photo of a corpse. And then the second one is called photographs, and it's an actual article. The article is very poorly written, but the pictures are amazing. If you are not comfortable with seeing corpses or dead bodies, basically, don't click on these two things. But for me, I personally don't like corpses and I don't like scary movies, but I do really appreciate these photos and the traditions of this culture. And I hope that you take an opportunity to look at them because they're really weird and interesting. And I'm saying weird in a respectful way because it's just not very common to me. And I think it's really scary kind of, but kind of weird, but very cool because of the love and the respect that they have for their ancestors and stuff like that. And of course, I hope you look at them and then, maybe we can talk a little bit about that sometime. Well, can we? I don't think we can because we're not going to have class. Actually, we're going to have a class and we're going to talk about it. Are we? Maybe. To be determined. All right, and then there's also a hyperlink for Angelo and Jennifer Morandino. And that's the picture that you see here with this man and this woman laying in bed cuddling. He's a photographer, and he took pictures of him and his wife. And there's also a documentary of basically her discovering that she was getting or she had breast cancer. So press the link here, and you'll just watch pictures of him and his wife through the beginning process to the end. And I think it's really moving and really powerful. So I hope you actually look at the. None of it is really graphic in any way. Like it's not like like the Manene pictures or anything like that. It's beautiful, but it is haunting as well. Lessons about living from those who are dying. So here are some excerpts of people who are close to death and what they said. Look the ones you love deeply in the eyes, and without words, let them know you love them and that they mean the world to you. Look at them so intensely and with such mindfulness that they feel as if you are the only person in the room with them. Say thank you and be grateful. Recognize your blessings, even in the face of despair. Say you are sorry when you have hurt or offended someone. Touch the ones you love and invite them to touch you. Touch heals, and touch penetrates the soul and fills you up with joy. Laugh, smile, and be playful. Let laughter enter every relationship you have with every person you know. Tell people how much you care about them. If you have a compliment or a kind thought about someone, speak it in the moment. Do not judge others without trying to understand them. Even if they have done you harm or wronged you, find a way to let it go and to forgive. If you live a life with compassion and love and concern for others, you too will receive these gifts in the end of your days. Be open and share your fears and pain with each other. Sit patiently with other people's pain. If you share your sorrows, they become less heavy and can easily be transformed into love and peacefulness. Take an interest in what other people do. Be genuine and curious in who they are. Ask about the welfare of others. Share your own wisdom and life lessons without giving advice. Tell stories about your own struggles and accomplishments without being arrogant or self-centered. All right, now let's talk about another part of death, which is called suicide, ultimate choice, ultimate surrender, or ultimate tragedy. And so what it is suicide is the taking of one's own life. Here are some statistics that the book provides. Over 41,000 people die from suicide annually in America. Over 1 million people engage in self-harm annually in America. Women attempt suicide 3 times as often as men. However, men are 4 times more likely to die by suicide. And here's the reason why. When women attempt suicide, they usually will do something like take an overdose of drugs, which actually doesn't necessarily always kill you. If someone can find you early enough, they can pump the pills out and stuff like that, right? Whereas men will do more physical violence like a gunshot wound or a hanging or something like that. And so then it becomes a lot more likely that you will unfortunately pass away. Age and ethnicity also can also the statistics can be different because of that. And also people who live with PTSD or depression are at a higher risk of suicide. People who consider suicide often feel that they are trapped in a dead-end existence and that life is unbearable. They simply do not want to go on, and their chances of change are slim. This is what they're thinking, right? So you need to take signs seriously. Yalam believes that we can offer no greater service to someone facing death than the power of sheer presence. Encourage the person to seek professional help and interventions. And I'll give you a really quick story. I had a friend who was really, really down, and he pretty much had hit rock bottom. And he got into some, let's say, trouble or accident, right? And he was freaking out. And so, he called me and I said, you know what, just come on over and let's just hang out, right? We can watch some TV or whatever, but just come on over to my house. And so my friend came over and we literally just sat on my sofa and we kind of had the TV on, but it wasn't really, we weren't really watching anything. He just didn't want to be alone. And I think that that is actually a very powerful thing that Irving Yalom is talking about, is to not be alone sometimes. And it's so difficult during this time period with the pandemic, right? And so I think about this, and I'm sure a lot of psychologists and counselors, therapists, and people who are helpers think about these things or even are thinking about the loneliness that we're experiencing at this moment. And it's so rough and so tough. And so I think it's really great that if you were interested in helping people, that, during this time is such an important time. Now the book talks a little bit about some of the signs that you would want to pay attention to. Suicidal thoughts and threats, absence of a sense of purpose in life, previous suicidal threats or comments, preoccupation with death. Preoccupation basically means really focusing and thinking about it all the time, including talk of feeling hopeless and helpless, giving away prized possessions, which meaning like the person's just giving away the things that they love the most, discussing specific methods and a time for killing oneself, anxiety, agitation, and depression, increased substance use, isolation and withdrawal from friends and family, extreme changes or behaviors and sudden personality changes, a sudden need to get one's life in order, and a sudden appearance of calm or peace after a period during which some of these above listed characteristics were evident. Here are some of the underlying messages when it comes to this as well. When someone has a cry for help, it would be, I cried out, but nobody cared. Or a form of self-punishment would be, I don't deserve to live. An act of hostility, see what you made me do. An attempt to control and exert power over people, I will make others suffer for what they did to me. An attempt to be noticed, maybe now people will talk about me and feel sorry for the way that they treated me. A relief from a terrible state of mind, life is too stressful and I see no hope. An escape from a difficult or impossible situation, they might say something like, I'm a burden to everybody, it will be a relief to them when I am gone. A relief from hopelessness, so they might say something like, I see no way out of this despair I feel, ending my life will be better than hating to wake up every morning. An end to pain, I suffer extreme physical pain and there's no end to it, my suicide will end it. And then an expression of shame or failure, I cannot face everyone after what I have done. Okay, so you want to pay attention to phrases like this. It doesn't necessarily mean that any suicide is going to happen, but if you do hear these things, you want to like note it into your notes. So let's talk a little bit now about the reaction to suicide. After suicide, the survivors around them begin their suffering. Surviving people are left with emotional turmoil, which basically means like conflict or feeling of trouble, okay? Unanswered questions and an emptiness that is difficult to deal with. And you'll hear people say, you know, was there a suicide note? It's because people do want to know what was going on, right? To try to understand why someone would want to do this. Survivors need time and opportunity to process feelings such as anger, self-blame, and guilt before they can accept loss. And of course, the feeling of survivor's guilt. It's, you know, why did that person die and I'm still alive, right? And that could be very psychologically overwhelming for the people around the person who has passed away. Here's another type or another branch of death, which is ending life as an act of mercy. So the first one is the word rational suicide. It means that a person has decided after going through a decision-making process and without coercion meaning being forced from others, and to end his or her or their life because of extreme suffering involved with a terminal illness. Assisted suicide involves providing lethal means to cause a person's death, with the individual performing the act that ends his or her or their own life. And then hastened death involves speeding up the dying process, which can entail withholding or withdrawing life support. Life support is basically maybe a machine that is helping them with their breathing or their eating, like a like a feeder tube or stuff like that. So I hyperlinked on that one a really well-known case of a woman named Terry Schiavo. So it's just a quick Wikipedia link. So I just want you guys to read about it and be aware of who Terry Schiavo, because it was a very controversial issue. Okay, and I'm not going to tell you more. I want you to just click on it. And then below that is the movie trailer for Jack Kevorkian, which is the picture of that person in Time magazine on the cover, called You Don't Know Jack. And it's basically a doctor who was helping people who were terminally ill die, and that's very controversial. It's actually very, very topical still to this day, is about assisted death and stuff like that. Choices about end-of-life care. So now we've talked a little bit about death. We're going to talk about now things that a case manager would need to know or how to do something when it comes to dealing with some of your clients. The first one is called Advanced Directives, designed to protect the self-determination of people who have reached a point in their illness when they're not able to make decisions on their own about their care. So what that is basically you're going to write a contract out telling people what to do with you if you were not able to respond or reply because of a physical illness or a mental illness or whatever it is. A living will is a person specifies his or her or their preferences of end-of-life care. So they'll say, you know, if this happens to me, you know, I don't want, let's say, a machine to keep me alive, just let me pass away, right? Or something like that. Identifying a person to make decisions on one's behalf when one can no longer do so. And that kind of goes into this one, which is durable power of attorney for healthcare. also known as power of attorney. Identifies one or more individuals who are empowered to speak for the ill person if this person becomes unable or unwilling to speak for themselves. So this is the person who's going to make the decisions about the other person when they're too sick to actually be able to do it themselves. They might be the one who is going to deal with the will, deal with billing, deal with inheritance, deals with property, deals with, medical care, deals with, all that type of stuff. There's also the hospice movement. Hospice offers care for those who are in the final stages of their journey in life. It gives permission to those who are losing a significant person to feel the full range of emotions during the bereavement process. So what that is let's say that you have a family member who is going to die soon. So they might go into hospice care, and there will be people there who are going to actually talk to the family members who are around them and allow them to be able to process what's going on, because it can be very, very traumatic for the people who are not sick, right? Provide services that help dying persons experience a sense of self-worth and dignity, and to provide support for family members so that they can prepare for the eventual separation. So sometimes people think that a hospice is a place for assisted suicide, and it's not like that, right? It's already a place where people are going to die soon, and we want to make their life as most comfortable during that time before they die. So there's no pain, or at least the least amount of pain felt, and to make sure that everyone is taken care of mentally, physically, and stuff like that when it comes to the family members as well as the person who is ill. There is a trailer for a documentary called Except for Six that I just posted on here, or hyperlinked here. I really encourage you guys to watch it because it's actually really interesting. It's just a trailer, and if you want to, you can go forward and watch it as well. Now let's talk about the stages of death and loss. Can you believe it? There's actually people who study this. It's so interesting. One of the most famous people is Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She's a pioneer in the study of death and dying. Made people aware of the need dying people have to talk about their impending death and to complete their business with the important people in their lives. So there are 5 stages of dying. Sometimes people, when you look through different psychology books, they might have different wording, but this is the overall, right? And right here it says Dead Like Me show introduction. There's a clip of the first episode of the show called Dead Like Me. It's really great. I really love this show. And it's about basically this young woman who dies, out of the blue. And she meets these Grim Reapers. Grim Reapers are basically kind of like these imaginary figures of death. And then she and the people who are Grim Reapers, they have a conversation, right? So this is the first episode, and it's really funny. I believe it's actually streaming on HBO Max, because I think the show was on HBO. But again, I recommend it because I love this show. It's really great. So anyway, so the first step is denial, which is I feel fine. This can't be happening to me. If it's something about death, obviously. Anger, why me? It's not fair. Or bargaining, I'll do anything for a few more years. Depression, I am so sad, why bother with anything? And acceptance, I'm going to be okay, I can't fight it, I might as well prepare for it. So these are things that people might go into when they are realizing that they're dying, right? Whether it's acquiring a disability of some sort or disease, whatever it is, an accident, and they know that their time is now unfortunately limited, right? Not everyone will experience these stages, okay? These are the common ones that Dr. Kubler-Ross had found out by meeting and interviewing and talking to a lot of people who were close to death. And of course, it's also not a linear progress, which means that it doesn't go in a straight line of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. It could actually be denial, anger, bargaining, and then back to anger, then denial, and then depression, and all this other stuff. Because life is complicated, and people are not going to be like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It just doesn't happen like that when it comes to something traumatic. It can go all over the place. It does not mean that person is failing or crazy or difficult. It's just this is how they're reacting to it. And sometimes it's really hard to accept death. Death, again, can be very scary for some people. Now let's talk about a relational model of death and grieving. A relational model, basically kind of like an idea, concept, or a theory, is an alternative way of thinking about death, dying, and the grieving process. Instead of thinking that we are born alone and die alone, people are born into networks of relationships and remain woven together past death. Um, Also, this idea of remembering, continuing to foster the memory of a person's life even after he or she or they die by involving the person in our daily lives, in our conversations, and in the choices that we make. So I hear about this quite a bit when it comes to people who are, let's say, going through addictions or living their sober life is, I'm going to do this for my mother, who passed away. I'm going to get my college education like she wanted to, but, I was challenged in different ways when I was younger. I'm going to do this for my mother. So that's a different type of memory, right? Re-memory, basically, is what they're saying, is to also know that, even though physically the mother may be gone, that their memory is still there and is a motivation, is an encourager, let's say, of the things that they will do now. And it doesn't have to be a mother, obviously. It could be a father, a sibling, a loved one, a child, or whatever it is. I know people will say, what would my mom do at this time period? Or what would my, blah, blah, blah do at this time period? And that's something that allows you to actually keep this person there even though they're not physically there anymore. So that's what the relational model is knowing that there's actually a whole network of people, even if they are dead, that are part of your life still. Grieving over death, separation, and other losses. Grief work or bereavement, same thing, which is basically that mourning period. Exploration of feelings generated by significant loss because of sadness, sorrow, fear, hurt, confusion, depression, resentment, relief, loneliness, anger, despair, shame, and guilt, right? You can feel all those things or some of those things when we go through a period of loss. So that's what we're talking about, is being able to work through these feelings. Grief groups help find out that we are not alone in our pain and in the healing that occurs by reaching out to others and forming bonds. So there are actual groups that might have, let's say, lost a child or lost a partner, and then they talk to each other, they relate to each other, those feelings, to allow them to process it and understand what's going on. It doesn't resolve the issues surrounding a loss, but can teach people ways of putting their loss into perspective. Here's an example that the book gives, which is Verna cried continually at a friend's funeral, but was composed at her husband's funeral. Why do you think that happened? One thing is, even though, let's say the friend was just a friend, not, let's say not someone very close, but she was like crying and letting all these things out. But when her husband passed away, she was very calm and cool and, not very emotional. So a lot of people would say she hasn't had time to process the death of her husband yet, if she loves him, right? We're talking about a loving relationship, not a hateful one. So that's something that I want you to start to see and observe, okay? And it's okay. You don't need to work everything out before the funeral or whatever. Sometimes it takes us a while. Sometimes we have to be strong for our family members, like let's say the children or whatever. So we'll grieve privately or grieve at another time. We want to show strength during this time period. And for some people, you might label it as unhealthy, but it really isn't, right? There's no right or wrong time to grieve, as long as they're able to grieve. Allowing yourself to grieve is called mourning. Working through grief on both emotional and intellectual levels. There's no correct way to grieve, like we just talked about. Although people are able to grieve, the loss will always be with them in some way. Again, like we said before, right? When we have problems, let's say an issue has popped up, we don't pretend like it's not there. We know and we acknowledge it's there, but how do we live with it in a healthy way? Eventually, you will make meaning of the loss, we're hoping. And then hospice programs are one way to understand the dying process. Again, like I said before, usually at a hospice situation, they're there to help you when you are confused, when you're angry, when you're feeling all of emotions, how to process those things. Will it always work successfully? No, not necessarily, right? We never know. But we know that hopefully those hospices are properly trained to be able to guide you and help you when you do. So here are some tasks of bereavement or basic things to do. Verbalize what happened to their loved ones. Visiting the grave site, right? Some of us do that quite a bit regularly, maybe every month. Some are every birthday or all the holidays. You stop by a gravestone and then drop some flowers or whatever it is. Being able to reminisce about past memories. Reminisce is basically kind of like thinking back to the past and enjoying those ideas or those memories. Worden had 4 tasks. The number one is accept the reality of loss. Death of the person must be faced, right? You have to acknowledge that person has died. 2, work through the pain of grief. Need to experience and express the emotional pain of loss and also be nurtured. 3, adjust to an environment in which the deceased is missing. So important to say goodbye, develop a good new relationship with that person. Okay, so maybe at night you'll say a little prayer with your for your loved one that passed away, or you might even talk to them. You might even say, good night, whatever it is that your relationship is going to be, right? It might be a motivator now. 4, emotionally relocate the deceased and move on with life. And that's about moving on with life. Again, we're not talking about uh, ignoring or pretending it's not there, but emotionally relocate, which means move it to the side, right? And also know that we have a life to live. And think about, we hear this in movies a lot. If a person dies, another person might go, what would have that person want you to do if they were here? And then you'll hear the character go, that person would want me to keep on living, right? Or whatever. So that's what this is talking about. Cultural perspectives on grieving. Rituals are culture specific, like we talked about the Manene people. Triggering painful feelings and then able to also release it. And continue emotional connections with the dead. Again, we're talking about talking to them, at nighttime or celebrating them during their birthdays or holidays and stuff like that. Grieving is also connected to, and this is not death related, some of them are not, separation from one's parents, because that can also have some grieving issues, seeing children leave home, breakup of a relationship, miscarriages, unfulfilled dreams or life goals, retirement, or loss of a pet. And the picture here is just basically, if you can't tell, it's like a pet collar with a flower in it. Not everyone gets married and have children, right? And some of us actually have pets that we love dearly. And so that is also very, very reasonable if you become very sad when you lose a pet because they were your companion. All right, so I wanted to end it with this picture that is really powerful. I actually think about this every once in a while, not all the time. It's by a photographer who made really famous this thing called the Humans of New York. So he goes around and he photographs people and he kind of like asks them a question. And for this woman, this elderly woman, her husband had just died, I believe. And so this is her quote, "Mo, how am I going to live without you?" And he said, "Take the love that you have for me and spread it around." Think about that. Isn't that beautiful and wonderful, right? I also hyperlink Humans of New York. It's not all death related. Some of the stuff is actually really fun and beautiful and funny and all that other stuff. But this one has always spoken to me because you can see that she's a little confused, right? Like, what am I going to do without the love of my life? And her love of her life is basically saying, you know, take that love that you have for me and give it to also other people. Share it. And I hope you think about that. All right. The last slide here is called eulogies. And usually if we were in class, this would actually be an actual activity that we would do, which is 3 types of eulogies. One is, I would want you to write a eulogy the way that you would want it, right? And then write it in a form. The second eulogy would be in the format of someone who might give it to you, right? That means maybe it's your child, maybe it's your partner, and how they would write it. And then also write one of the way that you think people might have written it that would make you very sad or upset, right? Like, what would you fear people to say about you at your funeral? It's a really powerful activity, and you can still do it on your own if you wish to do so. And But it's really long, so I'm not going to make it into a discussion. But I might relate that into the discussion board. But I want you to look at this. The top one is 8 memorable eulogy speeches. So I think there are 8 YouTube videos on one page, and it's actually really interesting. Some are hilarious, and some are really sad. Some are really beautiful, and some are really sweet. And also, eulogy speech samples are basically kind of like a template of what to say for eulogies, like, what are the components that would make a good one. And I hope that you guys all would never have to do a eulogy, but that's actually not true. We will all deal with death or experience death of our loved ones before we experience our own. And I want you guys to think about these things and also consider the culture that you live in and how we deal with it, right? I will tell you also this. Sometimes with death, if it's not taken care of properly, can be very messy within the family, within people. Suddenly you'll hear people say, well, that person owes me money, and you're their loved ones, you now need to give me money. Or why didn't I get an inheritance? These are the ugly parts of death, unfortunately, that some of us are going to also deal with. I had a friend whose parents, or a father who passed away, did not have a really good accountant. That person actually took advantage of the father in the end years. And so my friend basically had to take care of all this tax stuff. And you don't want to deal with tax at the end of someone's life, of your parents' passing, right? And so those are things why we would want to then say, you know what, let's have an advance directive, let's have a power of attorney, let's decide all those things, let's have a will and all those things, because believe it or not, some people are awful around death. And I wish you all not to be able to experience that.